Scenario number two, I had a different client who also experienced something like this, where they were looking to use a framework around a mental health disorder. And when they went to their advisor with this kind of lens that they were looking at their work through, their advisor said, no, that's gimmick psychology. My student did not agree. And so what my student had to do was similar to scenario one, is that they had to first figure out what is at the core of the reason that the faculty member didn't like the framework. And at the core, the faculty member just had a disagreement with the concept that in this particular diagnosis that my client was focusing on. Welcome back to another episode of From ABD to PhD show. Today is an exciting episode because it is the first video of a 5-part series titled Based on a True Dissertation. In this series, we are going to talk about real solutions and real problems that we are seeing doctoral students having with the dissertation process. And we are going to not only explain what that problem is, but also give you all actionable strategies that you can use to solve it. And we're going to be all things research related for these next 5 episodes, because we know from hearing from you all that you all have so many things that you're trying to understand about the research process. And we want to make these things simple for you so that you can act and that you can finish your dissertation. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about something that confuses many doctoral students when we go to do workshops. And that one topic is theoretical and conceptual frameworks. And in particular, I often hear of 2 challenges that students have with developing and conceptualizing the theoretical and conceptual frameworks. And in today's episode, I'm going to attack these 2 particular challenges and give you some real life solution on how to do this. So let's get into today's episode, because again, I'm so excited about this because I love to talk about these topics, and in particular to talk about this idea of when and how to pivot when your theoretical or conceptual framework is misaligned. Because one of the things that we are seeing from a lot of students when there's a challenge around developing theoretical and conceptual frameworks, it is around this idea around alignment in particular. And so one of the things I want us to kind of get a level playing field on is that when I'm talking about theoretical and conceptual frameworks, what exactly am I meaning? And so when I'm talking about these frameworks, these ideas around frameworks, when I say or thinking about a theoretical framework, what I'm suggesting is that we are going to use some established theory or model that's already existing to understand a phenomena, right? And I always find that theoretical frameworks provide you a lens to interpret your data. At the end of the day, when we're thinking about these frameworks, we are trying to take a lens to view a research problem through. Because honestly, we all could take the same research problem, but based on a theoretical framework, we can come up with very different research questions and very different research designs, even though we're looking at the same research problem. This is why people have bodies of work. And this is why there's disciplines, because we're all looking at a very similar issue, but through a different theoretical lens. So that's one route when we think about theoretical frameworks. But sometimes what you will find is that the theories that are available to you do not adequately explain the concepts that you're trying to explore. So at times you may need to rely on and kind of build from a more of a conceptual framework. So essentially with a conceptual framework, what we're going to do is combine multiple concepts. Sometimes we're going to combine theories together to understand a particular phenomena. And usually the conceptual framework is going to be built by you as the researcher. So to give an example for both of these, right? When we're thinking about a theoretical framework, in some of my work, I've used, for instance, critical race theory or Uri Brenner's bioecological systems theory. It's already a developed and tested model. It has constructs and aspects to it that have already been developed by scholars already in existence, and I've used that to explore particular issues through. However, sometimes I have to rely on developing a conceptual framework to understand a particular issue. And for instance, I was doing a study that explored human resource officers and their perspectives on using intuition in their hiring practices. When I did a study like that, I had to use intuition and kind of piece together different concepts around intuition to develop this idea of how I wanted to look at intuition, because what was in the literature at the time of doing my study didn't really fit what I wanted to do. So I built a framework. And I've also done this in my own work, even in my dissertation, where I started to figure out what was happening for Black male students at HBCUs that I was studying. And I developed what's called now the Black male adult learner success theory. It started out essentially as a conceptual framework where I combined a couple of different models together to really give me a lens to view the work that I was doing on Black male adult learners. So this is what I mean. Again, I just wanted to get as like a foundation as to what I'm meaning when I'm thinking about theoretical or conceptual frameworks. because now that we understand this and kind of have a level playing field, we can then unpack in terms of the challenge that we are seeing. And so, real quick, if you're watching this, make sure that you hit the share button to someone, because you know there's someone that you know who needs some support with this theoretical or conceptual framework. And if you find that you're someone in this process still trying to figure this out, stay tuned, because I got some particular strategies for you that I think are going to be extremely, extremely helpful. So let's get into this first thing that we see when we're thinking about in working with doctoral students. The first challenge that I see is oftentimes that there is a misalignment between your research question and the theory that you're going to use. Whether you're developing a theoretical framework or a conceptual framework, typically we start here. And just to give you an example, a lot of times you might be wondering, well, why does that even matter? Because you will start to hear from faculty that will say, hey, I want to see alignment in you using your theoretical or conceptual framework as the kind of engine that runs and the streamline that runs throughout the entire dissertation. So it's not one thing just to have it in a section in your document, but it should be guiding everything else that happens in your study. And so just to give you a real life example of how sometimes this misalignment might show up, is that I'm going to give you an example here. Let's say, for instance, my research question was, how does intuition influence Fortune 500 HR directors' hiring decisions, right? However, I'm going to look at that particular research question through Bronfenbrenner's bioecological systems theory. And so Bronfenbrenner's bioecological system theory suggests that our behavior is impacted by environments around us. While that may be a way to look at this research problem to some extent, there is still a misalignment because our question is focused on intuition, but our framework is more focused on environment. And unless we can make some strong connection between intuition and the environment, we have a misalignment between our framework and our research question. And why that matters is that when you go out to collect your data, once you get your data back, you have to use your theoretical lens to interpret your data. So if my data is all about intuition and the types of questions that I'm asking, interview questions, if I'm doing a qualitative study in this case, are all about intuition, but my framework is about environment, it may not give me the right lens in order to look at intuition through. So we can easily have a misalignment. And this may happen to you quite easily, right, in a study, because sometimes we have, sometimes we try to fit a theoretical model onto our research question rather than really allowing our question to guide us, or even allowing our framework to then guide us into a research question. And one simple strategy that I found to ensure that there's alignment between these two things, and I got to give a shout out to one of my professors, Dr. Glenda Prime at Morgan State University. She used to say this to us, and I didn't catch it until I got, finished my program. And then now I really see it helping hundreds of doctoral students. She used to say, hey, one way to make sure we have alignment between our framework and our question is to embed aspects of the framework into our research question. So let's take, for instance, this example that I gave around our idea around intuition and this research question, and us using, Bronfenbrenner's framework. Now that we know that Bronfenbrenner's framework is not the best look for this dissertation, maybe we might use, and I'll say this because I've used this in the work, there's a theory framework around, it's called the intuition rationality kind of complex. So it's basically saying that HR or people who are responsible for hiring have this complex or paradox, I should say, around using intuitive practices and rational hiring approaches. Now, that is a way more streamlined approach, so that we know that now our framework is around this intuition rational hiring paradox. That's our framework. And then our research question is like, how does intuition influence Fortune 500 directors' hiring decisions? Or if we want to even get more specific, what we can do is maybe say, how do HR directors at Fortune 500 companies balance the use of intuition and rational approaches to hiring in their decision making? Now we have this full alignment between our framework and our theory because we have integrated both together. This is something I think will save a lot of you all from just being frustrated with the dissertation process, because you really got to start thinking about how do these things come together. A lot of times what I will see is that it seems like the framework is disjointed. It's just in the document, it's separate, but doesn't guide anything else. Your framework should be the lens, and it's going to be the thing that pushes your work all the way through. Now, if this is resonating with you so far, make sure that you hit the like and subscribe button. And if you are someone who wants hands-on support where someone's actually diving into your dissertation to look at it and mold it and give you some feedback and actually look at your work, then you want to apply and schedule a consultation with us to learn more about the Velocity Coaching Program, which is a coaching experience to help you write and defend your dissertation in 1 year or less. So if that's you and you want the support, you want that hands-on guidance and feedback, go ahead and scan the QR code that is here on your screen, or you can go to www.velocitydissertation.com. Now, let's get back into this because, again, I know there are so many of you all who are looking to get this value and looking to get the support, especially around the framework. And we see this so much so common with our students. And so once we get this alignment together, the next piece and the second challenge I want to talk about today is when you have differences of opinion with your advisor on your framework. This happens a lot. I will say that, to be quite frank, this happens for a lot of times for scholars of color in particular in doctoral programs, where you may be looking at a particular research issue through either a racialized lens or, a lot of times, and where you may be in a program where your advisor doesn't really understand why we're looking at this issue through that lens. I see that happen. And then sometimes, this happens because your advisor has a certain stance on a particular research issue and they're not willing to bend. And what we found happen, this has happened most recently in the Velocity program with a couple of our clients. And I want to give you the real life scenario of what happened and then how we coached and gave them the strategy on how to circumvent the situation. So scenario number one was that we had a client who was looking at a study related to mental health practitioners. And in their study, they were focusing on Black mental health practitioners in particular. And they wanted to explore a concept around burnout, essentially, around these mental health practitioners, these Black mental health practitioners. Their chair, rightfully so, I didn't necessarily not agree with the chair on why they suggested this, but again, my client had a very strong belief as to why they wanted to focus in this particular area, whereas their advisor wanted them to add a racialized component to the model that they were exploring through this burnout aspect. Because they were essentially trying to make the case to the student that, hey, Black mental health practitioners have an additional burden because they're Black in particular. And I didn't necessarily disagree, and my student didn't necessarily disagree either. However, they were firmly believing that the model they had selected would give them the lens of how to unpack the experiences for this group of mental health practitioners. So, because they felt so strongly, they can't just in this situation tell their chair, hey, no, I'm not doing that. And I would recommend that's not the route that you want to go with this thing. You can't just say, I'm not going to do it. However, if you provide a rationale that's supported with evidence, now that engages in a entirely different conversation. So for my student that was inclined, who was in this situation, here's what we did. We said, hey, you're going to have to come to them with a strong rationale supported by the literature as to why you're going to explore this. And then typically what we would recommend and what the student goes into this meeting with is having a PowerPoint presentation, because again, we're trying to show our chair that we have thought through this and really have a strong rationale. When you come to your advisor with a presentation, like, look, I'm not just saying this because I just want to say this. I have a rationale and here's my presentation. Here's my argument. That changes the game. And so what our client did is went into that conversation, had their ducks in a row, had their presentation ready, was able to make their case. And you know what their chair did? Their chair said, you got it. I agree with you. You gave it a strong rationale. I will support your decision to not include this racialized component to the framework. That is what you're going to have to do when you are in a boat where you and your advisor may not agree on the framework. Again, the student had to understand what was the core of why, right? So partly is that you understand what is at the core. For this advisor, it was that they wanted them to use a racialized framework. But then what we did, I said, hey, let's go to your advisor's dissertation just to see how do they do research and what do they think through. And when we went to their dissertation, they used a racialized framework in their dissertation. So now that all made sense. Now we had a full picture of what was happening. So that's scenario one. Now, scenario number two, I had a different client who also experienced something like this, where they were looking to use a framework around a mental health disorder. And when they went to their advisor with this kind of lens that they were looking at their work through, their advisor said, no, that's gimmick psychology. My student did not agree. And so what my student had to do was similar to scenario one, is that they had to first figure out what is at the core of the reason that the faculty member didn't like the framework. And at the core, the faculty member just had a disagreement with the concept that in this particular diagnosis that my client was focusing on. So what the client had to do is really think through, all right, Do I want to go back and forth with my advisor? So first things first, do I want to change my framework, or can I? At this point, my client has started to write up the dissertation already. Could I change this, even though the advisor had agreed to this earlier? So that's a whole nother aspect, right? But my client to figure out, do I want to change my topic, which is an option? Do I want to try to have a stronger rationale and come back to them with evidence? That's an option. Or do I get a new chair on someone who actually has used this particular or studies this particular mental health disorder specifically? And so at the time that I'm doing this, my clients are contemplating which of the three routes they could go. All three can work. Sometimes you just have to figure out which is the kind of path of least resistance for you. One route, the probably easiest route might be to initially, you know, go back and forth with the advisor for a second to see, can you give a stronger rationale for your topic, and see, do they budge? That'll probably be my first step, right? Step one, see if they budge. If they don't budge, the next step would be to look at my document and say, hey, can I take a step broader than this mental health disorder to then potentially explore something else? But then by exploring something with a larger context, I still can check the box off on that mental health disorder I wanted to explore. So that probably would be step two. And then step three would be to potentially look for a new advisor, a new chair. We just know that may slow you down a little bit when you got to get the new person, ramped up into what you're doing. They have their own ideas around research and things. So that could slow you down, but that is an option that my client can go, and they're exploring kind of all three. But this is sometimes the decisions that you have to make when you're thinking about your theoretical conceptual framework. This is part of the dissertation process. This is the part that, a lot of times no course is going to teach you how to think through this. This is why, if you're in this boat and you need the support, this is why you need to come work with us at Done Dissertation, because we are doing deep dives into your work. Like this, these are two scenarios that have happened. We coach our clients through them, provide them the support and the coaching, even to how to engage in that meeting that you're going to have with your advisor. Because I know a lot of you are watching this and you might be feeling like, ooh, I want to do that, but I'm scared to have that meeting with my advisor. Look, these are the things we help you, give you the strategy, the confidence to walk into that room, that Zoom room, and to look in that box and tell your advisor, like, I hear what you're saying, but here's why I want to do something different. But I know what happened for a lot of you all, you won't get to this point of being able to do this work because you are stuck in doing things the way that you are doing them, and in particular around your framework. If you don't get this right, it's going to be very hard to carry out your dissertation. And so if you're someone that says, hey, I need help, I want someone to support me, I need that hands-on support, what I would urge you to do is go ahead and schedule a complimentary consultation with us to learn more about our Velocity coaching program and how we can help you get to the finish line in record time. So if you want to learn more about how we can help you get to the finish line, scan the QR code, or you can go to www.velocitydissertation.com to learn more about what we do. And with that said, I hope this episode was helpful. Again, we are in the first of a 5-part series where we are going to be very tactical and looking at specific aspects of the writing the dissertation that hold doctoral students up. Today's episode was on the theoretical framework, and I can't wait for you to see you next time on episode 2, where we're going to talk about one of your favorite topics, the literature review. And with that said, I want to say thank you so much. I'm Dr. Ramon Goings, founder of Done Dissertation and host From ABD to PhD show. And until next time, I wish you a Done Dissertation. Take care.